Welcome to Fox Soul's Black Report, your space for black news, views, and opinions. Today is Thursday, January 20th, 2022. I'm Seth Lemon.
I'm Nielle.
I'm Romeo.
I'm Demi Lobo. And on today's report, has voting rights legislation hit a brick wall? Well, we will look at the latest moves by the Senate and who President Biden is blaming. Then, a new law in one state makes it illegal to make white people feel uncomfortable when teaching about discrimination.
Look, it's got to be 5 o'clock somewhere. How about a shot for a shot about a popular liquor brand that donates $1 million to COVID vaccine research? And Megan Thee Stallion and Issa Rae share how you can manifest your dreams.
Lots to talk about today, and we have that and so much more. You know how we do it, from our perspective, in our voice, and in our truth. You ready? Let's go.
President Joe Biden is making the argument that he did not overpromise on COVID-19, the pandemic, or any other signature promise that he vowed to tackle. In a formal news conference Wednesday, marking his one-year anniversary in office, the commander-in-chief defended his course of action, pointing to his predecessor, President Trump, and the chokehold he still has on the Republican Party, what he calls a stalwart effort to block him from any successes.
Did you ever think that one man out of office could intimidate an entire party where they're unwilling to take any vote contrary to what he thinks should be taken for fear of being defeated in a primary? I've had 5 Republican senators talk to me, bump into me, quote unquote, or sit with me, who've told me that they agree with whatever I'm talking about for them to do. But Joe, if I do it, I'm going to defeat it in a primary. We got to break that.
Biden's prediction, well, it played out in real time on the Senate floor. Last night, Vice President Harris presided as the potential tie-breaking vote for the Senate as Republicans filibustered voting legislation that was pushed by Democrats and civil rights groups. An attempted pivot to defeat the blockade and pass the bill with just a simple majority, that also failed, as Senators Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin remained unwavering in their opposition. It's left many questioning whether the Biden administration is grasping at straws for any accomplishment to plug ahead of the midterm elections.
Look, I didn't overpromise, but I think if you take a look at what we've been able to do, you'd have to acknowledge we made enormous progress. But one of the things that I think is something that, one thing I haven't been able to do so far is get my Republican friends to get in the game of making things better in this country.
Now, addressing another high-class D.C. rumor, as Vice President Harris would call it, Biden told a reporter that he is indeed happy with Harris and that she would be his running mate in 2024, squashing any whispers of discontent within the Oval Office. What is clear from Biden's address yesterday and what we saw play out in the Senate last night is that Senator Mitch McConnell's plans are going just the way he intended. He said exactly what he was going to do. He laid out the playbook, and he was unwavering in that. And now we see that voting legislation has somewhat hit a brick wall.
You know, we always talk about the Republicans having better talking points. I don't think that Joe Biden should have gotten on national TV and said that he didn't underpromise, because we can kind of go down the line here. Gun control, as of January 2022, he hadn't sent any gun control related legislation to Congress. When we talk about police reform, the White House quietly dropped any plans for a national commission on police reform. When we talk about student loans, you guys know I always love talking about student loans. He was asked about the $10,000, dropping $10,000 in student loans that he promised. He ignored the question. So I feel like, not to shame Joe Biden here, but it's kind of like there are some under-promising that was happened on your day one. We haven't seen everything that he's been promising us.
You got to keep your word, right, Romeo?
You definitely got to keep your word, but here's what I like to talk about. They had him stand there close to 2 hours. They wanted to prove that President Biden had the stamina, right, to withstand all those hard questions. At the end of the day, what he said earlier when we played the video, he made a valid point. One man out of office is fearing the whole Republican Party. What are they getting paid to do? If they're not going to make a decision, especially a decision that's going to better our country and bring our country together as one, then why are they even there? Like, it's fear that's making these guys in the Republican Party not want to make any moves.
So President Biden made a lot of promises to the African American community. He had his Lift Every Voice campaign that he presented to us when he was running for office, and most of those things have not been delivered. And so he has a huge debt to pay to African Americans. And what happened on the Senate yesterday, I think he overthought his relationships with the Republican Party when he was a senator, when he was able to get things done. And now he sees that that is the days of the old, and something new has to happen. And of course he's going to keep Kamala Harris because he definitely wants to hold on to the black vote as much as he can. Okay, in our next story, Donald Trump's plea for executive privilege has been denied. Yesterday, the Supreme Court cleared the way for the release of presidential records from the Trump administration to the January 6th committee. Now, the committee will now have access to over 700 documents that could provide valuable intel to the events leading up to the insurrection, where hundreds of rioters marched to the U.S. Capitol attempting to take members of Congress hostage and stop the certification of the 2020 presidential election. No, Justice Clarence Thomas was the only justice to make his objection public.
Voting rights activists are angry about a possible move by Georgia Republicans that would close all but one polling place in a rural county. Civil rights groups say Wednesday's vote by the GOP-dominated Lincoln County Elections Board is a prime example of voter suppression. The county, which has no public transportation, is a Republican stronghold. Only 29% of its residents are African American, and county officials say they are making the changes because 6 of the 7 polling places have outdated equipment. Since Joe Biden's 2020 election over Donald Trump, GOP-led states like Georgia, Texas, Florida, and Arizona have enacted restrictive voting laws. Now, voting rights activists say all of those laws will make voting tougher for blacks as well as Latinos. We were literally just talking days ago about one mayor who is making a police unit that's going to make it make you fearful to vote. This is going to mean that some people will have to travel more than 20 miles just to vote. Again, if you have to travel 20 miles, if you don't, you can't get off that day, right? Because a lot of people don't even have the opportunity to be off on voting day. You can't get off. You don't have a car. You don't have transportation. You're going to be like, I don't want to go do this. Also, in Atlanta, they cut drop boxes from 111 to 23. So much is going on in Georgia and around the world, and I'm a little bit nervous right now.
Well, the good news that's coming out of Georgia is that this morning, the Fulton district attorney has called a special grand juror to probe Donald Trump and that infamous conversation that we had with the Secretary of State in Georgia, where he was talking about the ballots. And so once again, a black person, she's a black woman, she will be probing into Donald Trump. We have Letitia James in New York that is going after Donald Trump for civil suit. And then we have Bragg, the district attorney in New York, that's going after the criminal case. So all of these things, what's happening in Georgia, what's happening across the country with voting rights, it's leading back to putting the pressure on Donald Trump because at the end of the day, all of these voter restrictions, he's empowered all of this, and he's empowered the Republicans to do the things that they're doing to people of color.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And you think about it, when I was growing up, a lot of my elders, they didn't want to vote. They just worried about getting through their day, 9 to 5, taking care of their family. Now, the black community and people of color are awake. They are voting. So what they want to do, how can we suppress the vote? How can we take it away? Because they're voting, their voice matters, and that frightens a lot of people, bottom line. The murder trial for the killers of Ahmaud Arbery will cost Georgia taxpayers a little more than $1 million. The high-profile trial often drew large crowds to the courthouse that forced court officials to beef up security with increased spending on overtime and the hiring of additional safety personnel for the 5-week trial. None of those crowds turned violent, but the men were all convicted in Arbery's death. Greg and Travis McMichaels, along with Roddy Bryan, face federal hate crimes in U.S. District Court. Jury selections, they will start February the 7th.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams wants to know how many New Yorkers are interested in 40 acres and a mule. A group called NYC Speaks plans to survey more than 50,000 New Yorkers about reparations for slavery and other topics like segregation, culturally responsive teaching, police reform, and mask and vaccine mandates. Now, the survey will ask respondents how strongly they agree or disagree that New York City should provide reparations to residents who are descendants of Africans enslaved in the U.S. The $2.1 million initiative could help shape Adams' early policy moves and the city's next budget, which is due in June. Now, if you recall, Congressmember Sheila Jackson Lee is sponsoring a federal bill which would fund a commission to study and develop proposals for providing reparations to African Americans.
Now joining us to further the conversation about reparations for Black Americans is the chair of California's Reparations Task Force. Please welcome Kamilah Moore. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So there is precedent when we're talking about reparations, right? Precedent for other groups in the U.S. that have suffered official discrimination and persecution, sometimes even payments for their descendants. We see Japanese Americans joining in for the call, saying reparations then, reparations now. So what's all the hullabaloo? Why is this such a controversial issue?
It's controversial in part because we know the transatlantic slave trade, the institution of slavery, is the United States' original sin, right? We know about 40 acres and a mule and that broken promise. And so I would assume that's where the controversy lies, is how do we get America to atone for its original sin?
Now, you brought up 40 acres and a mule, which is something that African Americans are familiar with. But can you define to our soulmates briefly exactly what reparations would mean to African Americans?
Yes, so essentially reparations is a form or type of repair for past and contemporary injuries, particularly in this context for anti-Black discrimination in this country. And under international law, really briefly, reparations can come in at least 5 forms. So compensation or money is just one of those 5 forms, but then there's also forms like restitution, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition, which we have been discussing and will continue to discuss throughout the task force process.
So we've got this 9-member task force that is based here in California, one of the first task forces of its kind to examine this issue. But for many people, California, one of the last states to join the Union, its history with slavery is a little murky. Why do you think California, that doesn't have as maybe a rich history in enslavement in the history of this country, is leading the charge with this?
Yeah, you know, there's this adage, so goes California, so goes the nation. California has been a leader in a lot of different issues, and reparations is just one of them. But in one of our first substantive hearings in September 2021, where we talked about California's role and the institution of slavery, we brought up the fact, one of the many facts, for instance, that California adopted a fugitive slave act. Essentially meaning that when white slave owners brought their slaves to California to mine for gold, a lot of those slaves do that. California was a free state, so a lot of them had to escape, right? But once California enacted that Fugitive Slave Act, many of those, Black people in the state actually had to get shipped back into enslavement in the South. So California is not innocent in perpetuating the institution of slavery, not interested. And we will go into detail, or we already have, in past hearings and in our report, which will be released in June of this year.
Okay, I want to talk to you about eligibility, because there was a huge debate about Vice President Kamilah Harris not being eligible for reparations because she's not a descendant, a U.S. descendant of slavery. So can you talk about who is eligible for reparations, or is there a playbook for that?
So there isn't necessarily a playbook. And so that's another outstanding question that the task force has to decide on in terms of the terms of eligibility. To your point, right, the formal title of the Reparations Task Force is the Task Force to Study Reparations Proposals for African Americans, with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. So the chapter is still deciding what that language means. Whether there needs to be particular and specific reparations proposals for Black Americans who descend from chattel slavery in the United States, and everyone else doesn't get anything, or is it a mix? The jury is still out.
Right. We're running out of time, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to let us know. You guys have a reparations task force meeting coming up next week. Can you quickly give us the information in case some people want to tune in?
Check my Twitter, Kamilah V. Moore, or oag.ca.gov/AB3121. Our next meeting is January 27th and 28th. It is virtual, starting at 9 a.m. both days. Public comment also starts at the beginning of each hearing.
Public comment is important so everybody can weigh in on this. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about this very complicated issue. We'll check in with you soon.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful interview, Seth and Niel. So Cleveland Browns defensive tackle Malik McDowell was arrested Monday after he walked naked into a children's learning center in Florida. Video shows the NFL player surrounded by police as he sits on the ground in a parking lot. Officers say McDowell attacked them before they could restrain him. He is being charged with aggravated battery of a police officer and resisting arrest, as well as exposing his sexual organs in public. McDowell has a troubled history, and the 25-year-old was arrested in 2019 for a DUI as well as resisting arrest. The Browns say they are looking into the issue and have not commented on his future.
Texas election officials are rejecting hundreds of mail-in ballot applications. It's part of a new Republican-backed law that passed last year. 300 applicants in Travis County were thrown out because county officials say they didn't meet the state's new, tougher ID laws. Democrats say it's one of many efforts in Republican-lead states to suppress the voting rights of non-whites. This after Donald Trump's loss in the 2020 elections. The Justice Department has sued Texas over the new laws. DOJ officials say they disenfranchise Black and Latino voters in the state. Again, we see this issue happening over and over again. Even to the point where if they forget what name is on the original form that they signed up for, if they send in something different, they're going to throw them out. They're looking for any reason to take away the vote. That's why we have to continue to fight for that. That's why you have people going to Washington, D.C., risking their lives, going to jail because the fight cannot stop because of things just like this.
So what's happening here, Romeo, and I'm happy you broke that down a little bit, is so now you have to be required to give a partial social security number and an ID. And so what's happening is, say you registered to vote many, many moons ago, which some of our grandparents did, and we registered to vote many, many moons ago, and you forgot if you gave them a social security number or if you gave your state ID number or if you gave your driver's license. And so it could be an honest mistake. And so that's causing so many people not to be eligible to vote, and it is simply not fair.
Yeah, we've seen how the voting rolls were purged in Georgia just before the election, and Republicans claim that there are people who are voting twice, who have different addresses and are trying to rig the system, but there just is no evidence of that. And we saw that with those baseless claims that were pushed after the 2020 election. They consistently filed cases across the country in different courts trying to get something, grasping at straws, and nothing stuck. Not a single judge found any evidence of widespread voter fraud anywhere.
But now we know why the Republicans in the Senate didn't vote for voting rights, because if they would have, the federal mandate would have trumped all of these state voter suppressions and voter intimidation laws that we see happening in over 19 states in this country. And so this is the plan of the Republican Party. They're not going to pass it on Capitol Hill, and then they're going to allow the states to intimidate people of color and try to disenfranchise our votes. That's why it's so important for us to support the activists and the civil rights organizations that are pushing to make sure we get our right to vote.
Absolutely. Well, New York City's mayor, Eric Adams, says he doesn't even feel safe when riding his own city's subway system. The former transit cop who retired as a captain, he spoke about New Yorkers' safety concerns after a woman was pushed in front of a moving train and killed Saturday morning. Police arrested the man they say they believe did it. They think he's homeless and emotionally disturbed.
And we're going to make sure New Yorkers feel safe in our subway system, and they don't feel that way now. I don't feel that way when I take the train every day or when I'm moving throughout our transportation system.
Now, when pressed about his comments later Tuesday, Adams said that he's felt unsafe on the subway since day one of his administration just a few weeks ago, calling out the homeless that he spotted, people yelling, and what he calls a general sense of disorder.
Vice President Kamala Harris is set to meet with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, but one of its members won't be in the teleconference. California Congressmember Lou Carrera says he is boycotting the meeting between the caucus, the VP, and her new communications director, Jamal Simmons. Simmons has come under fire from Latino leaders after old tweets of his resurfaced last month. In the tweets, Simmons called for illegal immigrants to be rounded up by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Carrera says the tweets show Simmons' true ideas about immigration. He says the meeting will not change his mind. Simmons apologized for the tweets and says his opinions have changed.
A proposed state law backed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis would protect the feelings of white people. Yes, you heard that correct. It would make it illegal for public schools and private businesses to make white people feel discomfort when students or employees are taught about discrimination. Now, critics of the law say it's just a way to take aim at critical race theory, which is not being taught in the state's public schools. The Florida Senate Education Committee approved the bill yesterday, and the bill passed on party lines with no Democrats voting in favor of the law. What is interesting is I read this story, I forgot where it was at, but the story was a black woman's accountant. So she said that it's not fair for black people to be the expert on racism when we're talking about our white friends look to us as as the experts on racism, when we had to be forced to know about white people's history. We had to grow up in the history books, forced to learn about white history, but when it comes to black history, you have to look to us to be the expert on it. And so I find it interesting that now whoever is trying to make this law to make white people feel more comfortable, when nobody tries to make us feel more comfortable, when we're the people that feel the most discomfort talking about racism with those of other races. I
agree 100%, man. In my hood, we call this politricking. Here's a man, just yesterday we were talking about he wants to get police officers, right? $6 million is going to cost. He's not going to pay for it, but he wants them to be there to intimidate the voters, right? To stand over them, to watch what's going on. Now all he's doing is using this platform to poison the heads of people in this country, making them think that we're so separated when we're not. This is crazy that they even have to bring this situation up.
Yeah, this is definitely a bill about white privilege and protecting their privilege. And now they want to make it law. It's insane.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this. All right, sticking with the Florida theme, there's a substitute teacher in the Sunshine State who will not be reporting to work tomorrow. Now, this is all because she was forced to resign after students told school officials that the substitute had yelled racial slurs at them. Witnesses say the 59-year-old white woman continued to use the slurs even after meeting with the academy's principal, who happens to be black, and 3/4 of the entire St. Petersburg school district is actually black.